To understand Anchor, we need to see the machine that wasn't supposed to run. The machine, anatomy of a forbidden prototype. They built it like a dare. 2 counter-rotating rings nested inside a hexagonal frame, each ring sleeved in a superconductive bus that looked overbuilt until you traced the current paths. Between them sat a cage. Not a guard, not really. The notes call it a phase gate, as if the machine didn't just spin, it synchronized. You don't get language like that unless someone saw timing matter more than torque. The drive specs on that hard disk don't read like science fiction. They read like a work order from a team that had already broken bearings. Coil wind density is called out to the gram per meter. Cryogenic thresholds are underlined with a temperature window, so tight it tells you they blew a run when a valve hiccuped. And there's a number that repeats like a nervous tick, 14.3 kilohertz. Harmonic targets, not motor speed. Field rhythm. If you've ever tuned a radio by ear until the static clicks into a voice, you know how this feels in your bones. Echoes of Podkletnov sit all over the margins. YBCO as the superconductive lineage. Disk geometries that nod at the 1992 rotating disk claims while insisting everything is bus-fed, not bulk-fed. That matters. A bus lets you pump coherence across a structure instead of asking one spinning slab to be perfect. They learn from other people's bruises. The human angles hide in pencil. The lead engineer's checklist has 14 boxes and one prayer. Pray the bearings hold. Not a joke. Not sentiment. Bearings fail when coherence sneaks up on you. Resonance doesn't just rattle. It unloads weight, reloads it someplace you didn't bolt for, and turns a smooth rotor into a sledgehammer. That line says they'd felt the machine come alive in a way math didn't fully predict. What the logs call anomaly isn't polite. Under an instrumented load cell, mass drift shows up as a slow creep that spikes during near -0.68 phase coherence. The term phase coherence shows up in red a lot, paired with a caution triangle. When the system walked into that window, lateral flags tripped. Vector bleed. A tool sitting on a mat slid 2 inches east while the scale read lighter. The cameras caught nothing dramatic, because 6 seconds is both forever and not enough for clean video. Vendors tell their own kind of story. Billing trails stop mid-iteration. Part numbers jump sequences, like someone swapped a vendor and kept the drawing but changed the metal. That's a classic trick when procurement has eyes you don't control. You hide the upgrade in a familiar invoice and hope no one notices the alloy code. They noticed. The trail bends around a pump that chilled the bus 4 degrees colder than the published need. That's how you buy yourself a margin for coherence without writing it down. Every surface on the machine seems to answer a problem you can't see in a photograph. The rings carry split laminations to bleed eddy currents where you want them small, but they bulk them where the phase gate hands off. The cage looks like a Faraday shield until you map the grounding and realize it's staged. Ground, float, ground. That's not shielding, that's choreography. They were balancing fields like plates on sticks. The power feeds are uglier than you want in a lab. Stacks of caps that look like they came off a radar project, snubbers that scream fear of runaway Q, and a hand-soldered board with a note. Kill here if kill fails. Redundancy in a place redundancy shouldn't need to exist. The safety officer's fingerprints are everywhere, translated into bolts and bar stock. He didn't trust software when the room started to hum. You can feel the arguments in the documentation. One voice wants to push frequency. Another insists phase is the lever. The compromise is a staged ramp. The machine winds up in speed while the bus stays quiet. Then the bus wakes and the rotor relaxes. Control by detuning, like you're luring coherence into a pen you can close. It only works if you know exactly where the beast lives. Their circles around 0.68 say they found the pen, then watch the lock slip. If you've never stood next to a big rotor under cryo, you don't know the silence that falls right before the weirdness starts. The notes get terse in those windows. Load drift, 0.3%. Side tug mild. Abort, manual. There's a handwritten addendum on one run. Gloves off next time? It's a bad joke about dexterity and a tell about stakes. He wanted to feel switches because he didn't trust relays. When a room can reach sideways, you stop trusting anything you can't yank. The machine's foundation tells more truth than any memo. The mounting points are overbuilt with mu-metal collars, as if they were tired of fields leaking through bolts. If vector bleed is real, that's exactly where it hides, through the places your structure pretends is neutral. The scorches that show up later arc where those mounts meet floor. A good engineer designs for the force you want. A great one learns where the force will cheat. There's a blank on the drawing tree labeled anchor, 3C. Earlier revs show ring diameter growth and bus cross-section increases. 3C means the third child of a third generation. You don't get to see unless be worked just well enough to scare you. And tucked into the file tree is an error video of a rotor wobble that shouldn't exist in that bearing class. The caption is 3 words, not mechanical. Field. If this machine never ran, it wouldn't have these scars. If it only ran once, you wouldn't see procedural fatigue in the notes. This looks like a team that walked up to a cliff, chalked their footprints, took a step, and discovered the cliff had edges and directions nobody names in building codes. If it worked even once, there'd be witnesses. So who saw it? Witness layer 1, the technician and the polygraph. He didn't want to talk at first. He sat with his hands flat on the table, knuckles pale, and stared at the recorder like it might blink back. He'd signed the same secrecy forms everyone did. He'd kept quiet through job changes and health scares and a divorce. But when I slid a photocopy of the "Don't rotate past .7" note across the table, he exhaled and said, "We crossed it once." That was the sentence that opened the door. He remembered the room by sound. The soft roar of the chillers. The sharper whine as the rings climbed. A nothing sound when the bus woke, like the air getting thoughtful. He said the load cell display was boring right up until it wasn't. The numbers drifted, then jumped. A wrench on a rubber mat rose a hair, didn't drop, and slid left. That was when the safety officer said kill. He slapped the red, the software balked, and he reached for the manual. 6 seconds took their time. He didn't call it anti-gravity. He called it a bad idea that worked. His language was shop floor plain. Unload on the bearings, tingle in the forearms, a metallic taste when he inhaled the chill. He said he felt a tug at belt height, sideways toward the east wall. When we got to the word vector bleed, he made a face. He'd heard the term only once, in a meeting with people who didn't belong to their org chart. They said if it lifts, it leaks. The leak is what'll break your mounts. We didn't take his story on faith. We put him on a polygraph with a veteran examiner who'd rather lose a client than tick the easy box. Baselines first, name, birthplace, the year he finished apprenticeship. Then irrelevant probes to map his tells. His pulse is calm. Respiratory curve smooth. Skin conductance steady. The examiner starts the relevant set. Did you see a tool leave the surface during a powered test? Yes. Did you feel a lateral force concurrent with a mass apparent drop? Yes. Did you fake any instrument readings? No. The tracings barely move on the first yes, flicker on the second, sit flat on the third. Control questions are designed to make everyone squirm. Have you ever lied to get out of trouble? He snorts. Yes. Have you ever stolen anything? He hesitates, says a pen in the 80s. The chart spikes like it should. When the examiner cycles back to anchor specifics, harmonic target, phase window, the only time the needles dance is when he guesses wrong on a part code. He says 14.5, the note says 14.3. When we show him the log with .68 marked in red, he taps it and says, "That's the byte. You feel it there." We pressed him on what he couldn't have known if he wasn't in the room. Where was the manual kill? He points to a diagram and gets it within 6 inches. What failed first when the kill didn't take? He says the snubbers heated and the breaker hesitated. We have a purchase order for a replacement breaker dated the next morning. Did anyone wear watches? He laughs and shakes his head. The safety officer had a tray by the door for rings and straps. We have a photo, wrist-shaped tan lines, and a felt-lined dish. He contradicted himself once, and it mattered. Early on he said the coil carrier was titanium. Later he said Inconel. He pauses, rewinds, and says, "Carrier was Inconel, the fasteners were T. We changed the carrier after a warp." That matches a part number jump in the vendor trail. He couldn't have known the invoice names. He remembered the feel of a bolt that wouldn't take galling compound. We asked about the people in suits. He said they came on a Friday, signed the manual log as consultants, and asked for a bench test with the bus cold. They talked in a vocabulary that sounded like NASA Marshall during the Delta G years. Rotor overspeed postmortems, coherence bands, Q-factor runaways. They didn't laugh when someone said Podkletnov out loud. They asked for a 6-second ceiling. They left with nothing but notes and a new voice in the next meeting. His fear wasn't theatrical. It showed up in small details. He kept his body between the rings and the exit on the last run. He had a blister stripe across his palm from yanking the manual abort. He still rubs it when he talks about the room. He said the floor felt wrong under his boots 2 days later, like the slab had been stressed in a way concrete doesn't like to remember. He didn't have the words for microfractures. He had the word hollow. When we finished the exam, the polygrapher pushed the folder across the table with the clipped tone he uses when he's sure. He's truthful on the core claims, he said. The technician didn't smile. He just looked tired. He asked one question. Are you going to say it worked? We told him we were going to say what the instruments and the scars and his tracings let us say. He nodded, then handed us a photocopy of a checklist with one box unmarked. We recorded one more run, he said. The directory's missing on the drive you've got. That's the breadcrumb he didn't have to give. It put a time on the crisis we'd been circling and a hand on the door we hadn't opened yet. Paper trail, procurement, emails, and the missing week. The paper trail didn't start with a confession. It started with a receipt. A redacted purchase order for a pair of cryogenic pumps rated colder than the spec sheet claimed was necessary. The vendor name was familiar to anyone who's read NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center Delta Sierra rosters, but the buyer of record wasn't a center, a lab, or even a prime. It was a shell LLC incorporated 2 months earlier at a mailbox store, dissolved a year later without assets. On its ledger, mu metal shielding by the square meter, vibration isolation feet rated well above the known mass of test article, and a breaker assembly that would get replaced the morning after everything went wrong. Freedom of information wasn't a door, it was a mail slot. Documents arrived blocked out like crossword puzzles, but dates survived. Serial numbers peeked through. When we stitched them, they drew a heartbeat. Pumps, then shielding. Caps by the pallet. A rush order for snubbers. Big power first, then the cage to keep it from chewing through the room. It tracked exactly like a team chasing coherence and learning the hard way that fields don't respect drywall. Emails spoke quieter, but they cut deeper. One thread, stamped internal, avoided all the words that make people curious. Lift event window must not exceed 6S, someone wrote. No greeting. No signature beyond a department tag that doesn't exist anymore. Another line, manual log this week. That phrase sat like an apology. Why would you move from badged access to a spiral-bound notebook? Cameras were under maintenance. The access control system was intermittent. For 7 days, the logs went dark except for first names in pen. Call it the missing week. It started late on a Thursday, and by Friday the 6-second ceiling was in every email like a drumbeat. The last normal badge ping read 2112. After that, the timestamps lived in ink, not silicon. The entries are ordinary until they aren't. J. Patel, compressor check. M. Rivera, coil wind inspection. Then a gap. Then 3 signatures you won't find in the directory, all in the same tidy hand, all labeled consultant. They came in the afternoon, left after midnight, and took nothing but coffee and a stack of printouts you can't FOIA out of a shredder. The financials told a colder story. Hazard bonuses posted to accounts the Friday after the crisis run, then held. A memo flag, pending resolution. Froze pensions, froze transfers, froze questions. The Shell LLC cut the checks, then dissolved the quarter after the hard drive appeared. On the way out it paid a contractor for floor remediation post-anomaly, and a separate line for EMI shielding repairs unplanned. That language reads like someone writing for the future, leaving breadcrumbs while pretending to mop. One email arrived like a shard of glass. Anchor 3C, do not exceed threshold parameters. Prior events suggest structural coupling at 0.68 phase coherence. If triggered, abort within 6S. There's no physics lecture, no boast, just a limit written like a nursery rhyme because people remember rhythm when the room shakes. Whoever typed it knew that the weak link wasn't bravery. It was seconds. We hunted the calibration contractor. He answered on a number that still carried a city code from the 1990s and said he didn't do that kind of work anymore. When we read the invoice line, post-anomaly floor repair, he got quiet. I checked a level on a pad that shouldn't have moved, he said. The bubble wandered east a hair. Concrete doesn't wander. He wouldn't sign a statement. He did say he replaced 2 isolation feet because the rubber looked chewed without teeth. That image lived in our notes like a bruise. Procurement breadcrumbs lined up with the technician's memory in ways you can't fake if you weren't there. The breaker replacement landed on a purchase order the day after the night he slapped the kill and felt the hesitation. The mu metal sheets doubled midway through the build, right after internal emails started using the word bleed in lowercase like it was becoming furniture. And in the middle of the missing week, a courier ticket shows a run from the test bay to a building across campus where people sign different NDAs. The payload line reads, "Media encrypted." Why switch to manual logs? That's the kind of bureaucratic decision that sounds boring until you remember what the badge system does by default. It keeps time. It also creates a record you don't control. If you expect visitors with names that don't appear in phone books, you fall back to a notebook you can misplace. The missing week wasn't a glitch. It was protocol. Now, the email that mattered most arrived at 1:22 on a Sunday, sent to 3 addresses that bounced today. Terminate anchor activities pending external review. Continue equipment preservation. Do not transmit additional data via network systems. It locked in the missing week, the 6-second ceiling, and a switch from servers to shoes. Paper in pockets, not packets on wires. You can feel the hand on the brake and the hand over the mouth. Data didn't stop. Transmission did. That's how you move a story from a server to a hard drive in a locker months later. The paper didn't confess. It didn't have to. It marked time, drew limits, paid bills no one could explain, and named a week everyone pretends not to remember. And buried inside those muffled lines sat the one thing we needed most, the 6-second ceiling, written before anyone could argue it down. Forensic floor, scorches, stress, and vector bleed. The floor remembered what people tried to forget. You see it first as a discoloration along the anchor pads, half-moons of brown-black that don't read like an electrical blowout. Short-sleeve blossoms, almost flowers radiating from a point. These arcs trace like brushstrokes, all leaning the same way, curling east. If you overlay the machine footprint, those curves line up with the mounting bolts that took the worst of the load when the room went sideways. Not up. Sideways. We brought in a materials guy who spent his life listening to concrete lie. He ran a Schmidt hammer across the slab and frowned at the bounce-back numbers. Too soft along one axis, normal on the other. He drilled a core at the edge of a scorch and handed us a gray cylinder that looked like every other chunk of cured mix until you put it under light. Microfractures laced the aggregate like hairlines in tempered glass, but they weren't random. They stood at an angle, marching east, like the slab had been pulled for a blink and then told to forget. Here's why that direction matters. If vector bleed is real, it can't just nudge air and tools. It has to find a path through the machine into the room. The mounts are the path. Bolts, collars, floor. The mu-metal sleeves around the anchors were supposed to keep fields from biting the structure. The scorch arcs wrap right around those sleeves as if the bleed walked the steel, met the shielding, then spilled into concrete along the easiest way out. Everyone said electrical first. So we checked for copper ghosts, beads, spatter, the glassy spray you see when a bus bar lets go. Nothing. The arcs didn't pit. They smeared. When we scraped, the top layer flaked like a skin cooked from the inside. That points to heat arriving through conduction, not a flash from above. The power feeds did run hot that night, breaker replacement says as much, but the scorched geometry doesn't obey the feed layout. It obeys the mounts. 3 feet from the worst scar, the floor looks bored. That's the tell. Electrical chaos doesn't respect borders that cleanly. A lateral impulse dumping through a handful of bolts does. Our materials guy took a micro-hardness tester to the zone and logged a gradient that fades with distance from one anchor point. He shrugged and said, something yanked. Engineers don't like that verb. Floors aren't supposed to feel tugs. We found a janitor who worked nights that month. He didn't want his name on tape. He did want to talk about his mop. It slid funny, he said. Not like the grout lines. Like the head wanted to go east. I thought the floor was waxed wrong. He said it lasted a week, then stopped. He wasn't in the room during the run. He was in there after, swabbing a memory the slab hadn't finished releasing. Human senses get dismissed in labs. But when a stranger describes the same vector the fractures point to, you stop rolling your eyes. There's a photo set somebody took for insurance. It lives in a dusty folder with the word maintenance on the tab and the year misfiled by 1. In those frames, you can see hairline crescents sketched around 2 pads like ripples after a toss. At first glance, you want to blame a pallet jack, but the crescents sit under the shadow of the machine's footprint, not in a path a forklift would take, and the timing stamp matches the missing week. If you squint, you see one more thing, a faint soot trail veering toward the east wall, pausing, and fading where the isolation feet were replaced. We checked the anchors themselves. 2 bolts show galling that doesn't belong to torque. Threads look rubbed, not torn. A lab report on the collar's notes, localized heating not attributable to uniform friction. Translation, hot in stripes. Stripes are what you get when a field walks a path, not when a wrench slips. The collars, mu metal layered, show a discoloration band that mirrors the arcs in the slab. You can read the energy's route like a map. If this were vibration, the residue would tell a different story. You'd see spalled concrete where a harmonic shook a foot loose, chips where a plate chattered, cracks radiating from corners. Instead, the fractures align. The scorch arcs lean. The bubble in a contractor's level wandered east, not diagonally across joints. The mounting geometry and the damaged geometry shake hands. That handshake doesn't happen by chance. There's one more oddity. Along the east wall, 5 feet up, the paint shows faint stippling you don't notice until you drag light across it. The stipples form a low arc, as if a fine dust lifted and then kissed the paint in a hurry. The safety officer's note about removing watches and rings lands here. If the room briefly changed how metal behaved in a band, even a thin one, debris would move in unhelpful ways. A pen doesn't have to fly to be wrong. It just has to slide, then pepper a wall with proof it took a route it never takes. We aren't claiming a smoking crater. We're pointing at fingerprints. The slab keeps secrets badly. It records direction, not motive. Everything points east through the mounts. Everything whispers the same phrase. The force you wanted went somewhere else. And if the room remembers, the power that fed it should have screamed. So we followed the electricity. Power profile, the night the grid blinked. If the slab whispered, the power system raised its voice. Utility logs don't care about NDAs. They track watts, VARs, and the moments when a campus pulls more than it should. On the night the wrench slid and the floor took a bruise, the meter spun a story. Reactive power swung out, dipped, and then whipsawed back like a driver overcorrecting on ice. For 6 minutes, the profile looked agitated. For 6 seconds, it looked wrong. Start with frequency. Generators hate being surprised. The campus cogen plant recorded a 3% sag at 207, a droop that says something leaned on the system hard and fast. Then a compensator kicked, overshot, and settled like a breath after a sprint. There's a maintenance ticket the next morning for a breaker swap, exact part number we saw in procurement. The note in the margin, contacts scored, heat signature inconsistent with rated load. That's shop speak for. It got hotter than the math says it should have. Engineers write their panic as neatly as their plans. In a binder that survived 3 purges, someone penciled, Q factor runaway at 0.68, kill sequence failed once. Q is the letter that ruins quiet labs. High Q means energy loops with low losses. It's how you build beautiful filters. It's also how you build unplanned amplifiers if your structure becomes part of the circuit. A runaway there can yank VARs like a thief, bending reactive power into places the grid doesn't expect. The anchor machine wasn't just pulling current, it was tuning the room. Line monitors captured a hiccup you only see when big inductances start arguing. Phase angles drifted. The power factor slid off unity, as if the load became momentarily springy. That word, springy, isn't poetic. It's what the math says when your load stores energy elastically instead of eating it steadily. The campus saw a sudden appetite for reactive support, the kind you get when capacitors and inductors start a dance you didn't choreograph. Someone in facilities left us a gift, a strip chart scan from a recorder they never digitized. The needle gets jumpy right at the timestamp that matches the missing week's midnight entries. You can see a puff of VARs disappear, rebound, then oscillate twice before damping. 2 cycles. That's not a motor tripping. That's a tuned system brushing resonance and letting go because somebody finally ripped the plug out by hand. The technician's blister has a waveform. Meanwhile, the power quality logs from the utility side flagged a transient they labeled customer-side anomaly, likely capacitive event. They aren't wrong. Banks of caps lived in that bay, fat cans meant to shape and snub. But the shape of the event doesn't look like a single capacitor dump. It looks like a whole network breathing, then choking. It also left a bruise on a feeder upstream, tiny but there. You don't see upstream bruises unless energy tried to walk back against its leash. Here's where it lines up with NASA Marshall's old headaches. During the Delta G replication days, internal notes fretted about coherence bands, making rotor rigs draw reactive power in bursts. Not constant hum, pulses when the field alignment snapped into place. Anchoring a rotating superconductor to a bus creates loops inside loops. If Anchor found a band around 0.68 phase coherence, the grid would have felt it like a drummer adding a beat where silence should be. Our logs show that beat. There's an odd entry in a night shift work order. Check ground straps in Bay C, felt hum through rail. Ground rails don't hum unless current is walking skins in ways grounds aren't built to invite. The hum note sits a minute before the frequency sag. Meanwhile, a separate digital meter registered a zero crossing jitter, microseconds but measurable. That's not a grid on a calm night. That's a lab pushing a system to the lip. We chased a rumor about flicker complaints. In the building next door, a grad student wrote in a forum post that the lights winked twice that winter around 2 in the morning. He thought it was the HVAC kicking. The timestamps he guessed at land inside the strip chart dance. When the campus coughed, the fluorescence spoke. The control sequence mattered. The staged ramp we saw in procedures meant motors spun before the bus woke. Motors alone don't draw this footprint. When the bus slid into coherence, the reactive demand surged. Then the kill didn't take. Kill here if kill fails, the hand-soldered board note said. It failed once. They went to metal. The power record answers that with a fast cliff followed by a wobble. Software hesitates. Humans don't. There's a forward echo we can't ignore. In 2026, an aerospace test many states away logged a near-identical power signature. Brief sag, overshoot, var oscillation. During a propulsion run a contractor later described offhand as chasing inertial bias. On paper, unrelated. In waveform, cousins. Anchor's Q-surge shows up like a fingerprint 3 decades later. The stakes weren't abstract. A Q runaway in the wrong band can cascade a campus. Trip a feeder, kill cooling, wreck a cryo, and you go from weird physics to a fire truck in 8 minutes. The safety officer knew. Extra extinguishers weren't paranoia. They were math with red handles. When the grid blinked, the room proved it could talk to the building. The building blinked back. Follow the electricity long enough, and you stop asking if something happened. You start asking who walked in the next morning with a directive not to leave a digital trail. The power system already wrote one. The safety officer's notes: don't rotate past 0.7. He wasn't a theorist. He was the guy who walked rooms before other people did and counted ways a day could go wrong.